Hello everybody, this is the second video on figures in the scientific writing lecture. I'm Inge Grünberg and presenting here is the second part. So this lecture covers a lot of details. The first video was on the general principles and about what to include in a figure, how to consider different publication types. And I introduced the figure types briefly, and in this lecture I will show you more about the data reproductions and the schematics, which are two of the four figure types. And the others will follow in the next video. So data reproductions are really very original material, no processing done before. So this is, for example, just a picture of my study site. So I work on permafrost landscapes in northwestern Canada. So this is a picture of the landscape, and you directly see a lot of things just from looking at the image. For example, it's often cloudy, and we have lakes. In the back you have more lakes. And it's not flat, but also not mountainous, just a little hilly. And the vegetation, you see there are some shrubs and some trees. You get a really nice impression of this landscape directly with this one picture. And of course I could also describe this landscape in my paper just with words, but it would take much more space and you wouldn't get such a direct impression, and this is very important. In earlier days, before photography was really invented, people also made really detailed drawings like this very famous drawing from Dürer. So there, of course, you can also see all the details of a hair, and even better than in a picture sometimes, because the artist could stress the things that are important and nothing in the way, so you really see every detail. But also nowadays pictures, and if you can do it, of course, drawings are a very powerful way of really showing the details of for example, a landscape, but it could also be other types of study objects or experimental setups, measurement devices, ways of how a person does a certain measurement. There are lots of different things you can think of showing in a picture, and I will mention them in a second. So this slide here is to show a different way of presenting the same pictures depending on publication type. So this example here is from a scientific paper, and I show the 6 different vegetation types and have these little letters, including which is which one, and referring to in the caption, which I don't show here. While for a poster I did the same pictures basically, but I have the legend here on top of the images, and then I also included the colors, which I use also in other graphs. So on a poster I was able to use these little pictures as a legend for all the different graphs that I had on this poster, because, for example, the trees I always had with this light blue color and the tall shrubs with this dark blue color. This was very easy on a poster because everything is on one page, while I couldn't do it in the scientific paper. There I really need to include the legend in every single figure. And these type of pictures mostly go into the methods section, but sometimes you might also have results shown as pictures. Even if you have just pictures, you can still add some more information. For example, this is from a study of a colleague of mine who is working on soil slumps. So this is in a permafrost landscape where the landscape gets disturbed and there's like a massive landslide, very slow, but it's losing material to this lake, for example. And he doesn't only have a picture of this landscape, but also shows like there's this scar zone here, and we have a former older soil slump here. There's a little bit of a description in the picture and also a scale. And also in this other example of the same scientist, we have here a picture where we have a scale already, but as it's hard to read, he indicated this 30 centimeter again here. and also had like a legend in this figure. So this is more organic soil, this is mineral soil, and he's adding this information to a picture. So these two examples are also there to show you what not to do, because I don't like the top example so much because the fonts are blurry. It's really easy to see that it doesn't look very sharp, this writing in the picture, because the whole thing was saved as a JPEG. And JPEG is a lossy format, and especially for these additional elements like fonts or arrows or some other elements, this is really unfortunate because it gets blurry and it doesn't look very sharp anymore. Please, please, please don't save the picture and the text together as a JPEG, but only leave the picture as it is, then include the text in a software, for example, Inkscape or GIMP or LaTeX or any other software, but then save the complete picture in a vector format like PDF and not as an image, because with a PDF, fonts never get blurry. And this is something I really want to stress throughout the whole lecture. Please never ever use a pixel format such as JPEG for a graph that doesn't contain a picture. And also use a high enough resolution. I mean, I guess it was difficult with this figure because it was taken by a drone, so maybe the resolution was really limited and the person taking the picture couldn't do anything about it. But if you have the opportunity, just use a high resolution so people can see all the details. So this slide is to show you that with pictures, it's always also a bit dangerous because you don't know what the reader will actually see. And this is because it's not processed in a way that you only show what the reader should know, but a picture always shows a lot of things at the same time. So, for example, here we have two pictures from different years in the permafrost zone. And I was really struggling to try to figure out what should I learn from these pictures in this paper. Is it important that here there's more flowers on the cotton grass than here, or maybe the weather is better? No, actually it's about this piece of soil here that broke off. But it's very difficult to see because the perspective is different. So that definitely could have been easier if the person who took the photos would have stood at the same spot and used the same camera and the same view angle and the same other settings, just to show exactly the same picture twice in different years, but not showing it slightly differently. And this example is an even more drastic one, because in this paper they compared the albedo, so how much of the sunlight is reflected from different vegetation types. And it's a very well-known fact in literature that shrubs reflect less radiation, less sunlight than tundra without shrubs. So this here is the tundra without shrubs. It contains a lot of lichen, so it's brighter than the shrub patch. That's what everybody always measured and wrote about. And then this study said, well, it's not the case actually. So shrubs are actually quite bright, and we measured that the albedo of shrubs would actually be as bright as the albedo of other tundra. But then they show this picture of their measurement setup, and to me it was directly clear that this is rubbish, because the shrub patch is quite small and all around is this other type of tundra. And if you know these instruments here, the radiometer that measures the radiation above the shrub patch, it has a view angle of almost 180 degrees. So this sensor doesn't only see the shrub patch, but it sees a lot of these other tundra as well. So basically, from presenting this picture in their paper, it's clear that the shrub patch is just too small and that the measurement results are not clear to support their hypotheses or their findings, as they should have used like a bigger shrub patch, for example, if they really want to talk about shrub albedo. So this is something that I want to highlight, why it might be dangerous to work with pictures, because pictures contain a lot of information that you didn't intentionally put there. So more about pictures. So I think pictures are super important to show your landscape or your study object, but there are lots of things to pay attention at. First of all, before you go to the field or before you do your survey or you go to the lab or you send somebody else to collect the data, doesn't matter, before you need to plan what kind of pictures will you need to show your work afterwards. And it's really essential that you think about this before you go, because most often it will be impossible to go back and then take the picture that you forgot to take when you originally were on your field work. This is something that is really difficult, because usually you come back and then you find out that you really don't have a nice picture of whatever you want to show, the landscape you worked in. You have a lot of funny pictures of yourself and your colleagues doing stuff, but when you look through the pictures, all of a sudden you find out that you're missing pictures on something specific that you would really need to show. So plan ahead, make sure you take all the relevant pictures, or you make somebody else take them if you can't go yourself. And this might include the landscape you work at. It's always good to show. Then the study object that you have, I don't know, maybe you work with a certain animal species, of course you need to take pictures of this animal or the plant. Or if you do a study in human geography and you ask people about how they use space in Berlin, for example, it's also good if you ask them if you could take a picture of them, maybe doing an activity that they like to do outside, depending what your study is on. For example, your study is on how people use the Tempelhofer Feld, and it's good to take pictures of the Tempelhofer Feld and the people that you actually interview, how they use it. Of course, you can also find pictures of the Tempelhofer Feld in the internet, but you have to be careful with that, because there might be issues of copyright if you want to use them in a scientific paper, for example, or even in outreach material. It doesn't really matter. As soon as you reproduce a picture from the internet, somehow you really need to make sure that the copyright is okay. It's not enough just to cite the source like I do here. This is only okay because my presentation is not published in a way. So I just show it to you. I hope that's fine that I use this picture. But if I would want to publish it, this would not be enough. I would really need to go back and find out the authors and make sure that I have the right to publish this picture. So it's easier if you take the picture yourself. Also, then it shows more of the conditions that you found when you were there. It's also good to take pictures of instruments that you use for your measurements, or people that perform a certain measurement. Also lab devices or samples. There are lots of things that need pictures. Also the difference before and after is sometimes very good if you want to show how things develop. Please, not as in the example before. And then also already when you take the picture, think of what might I need as additional elements. For example, this picture I showed there has a hammer as a scale. And this is very common in geology, for example, to use this hammer just to make sure that people know how big the thing that your picture is. Because it's lava, for example, in this picture, you wouldn't be able to tell if this is just a millimeter or if it's 100 meters. It's very difficult. So geologists always use the hammer. You could put the scale bar. If you have just one little object that you want to highlight, maybe you can put something that highlights this object. If you take a picture inside or of a measurement, it's always good to tidy up before. Just think of what is on this picture. Do I need all these things on the picture? And if not, what can I remove to make the picture look more tidy and nicer? So just try to make like a clean picture that shows only and stresses a lot exactly your main point. it's really difficult sometimes when you take a picture to already see this in your head, but definitely after taking the picture you should look at it directly to see, oh no, this looks kind of weird because there's another thing in the picture that I didn't want there, so you can go back directly, try again. Of course, there are lots of things to photography, and I really can't tell you much in this short video lecture. You will have to read up material on that. Just very briefly, it's always good to make the pictures nice and clean. There's lots of advices on good photography on the internet, for example. So just go back, look at some tutorials how to take good photos. One thing you definitely need to consider is light. So here's an example of different faces with different light in the face, and obviously here you can see the woman or the man best. But also you need like even light, not too dark and not too bright. And here you see different ways of light on an apple. And with this direct sunlight you see that there's a very strong shadow, for example, and here it's very white. So diffuse light, like in the second example, might be better to highlight the apple, whatever you want to see about this apple. It's usually not a good idea to like turn your camera a bit. Just try to make it very clean and have a standard orientation of the camera, for example, and no other like funny elements, because we are talking about pictures that you would want to use in your scientific publication. Then it's always good if you have your objects stand out. So if you look at these two pictures, they have a very different meaning. So if you look at this one, you see the poppy seed flower and maybe the capsule with the seeds. While on this picture, you see a meadow with a lot of flowers. So both might be very good. It just depends on what you actually want to show. Is your paper more about poppy seeds and their specific flowers, or is your paper more on meadows with lots of flowers? You really need to consider, for example, changing the aperture. And this is something that really is only possible with a proper camera. So if you go to the field, if you need pictures to highlight your study objects or your field site, please bring along a proper camera and not just a phone. I know the cameras in smartphones got much better recently, but still there are different options that you have with a real camera. For example, changing the aperture or changing the shutter speed. As you see here, the shutter speed is very different and you get quite a different impression of this waterfall. And these options you only have with a good camera, and it's always worth to take one, especially if you have low light available or other difficult conditions, like you need a very fast shutter speed or a very slow one. Or you have special objects, like if you want to take pictures of stars, for example, you would be lost with a smartphone. So take a good camera. Of course, maybe you don't have one, but your university or research institute should supply you with one. But of course, it doesn't help if you don't know how to use it, so you would need at least a short course on using this camera. And then make sure that all your pictures that you want to show are really sharp and have a high resolution, just good quality pictures. And of course, they should show all the details that you need to show. So that was a short summary on data reproduction, so pictures mostly. And this part now is on schematics. So this is already some more processed way of showing your data or your methods. For example, here is a nice example from a colleague of mine, Jan Nitzborn, who defended his PhD recently. And he parameterized a model of a permafrost landscape. And on this schematic, you see the different parts of the landscape that he used in this model. For example, the Jedoma deposits and drained lake basins, and there are also river channels, but they are not explicitly considered. So that is what he writes on the top here. So this is a very nice way to show your model setup. So what do I consider, what not, what is important here. It's the same in this figure. It's from the same or a similar paper from our colleague who is now in Alaska. And this is again about source lumps, and he defines in this schematic all the different parts of this lump that are important. Or here we have another example from another colleague from Canada, where it is defined what the numbers he shows later actually mean. So what does he mean with hummock frost table depths? This is from here to here. So this is the hummock. Here we have this one measurement that he has data from, and there's another measurement here. So this is an inter-hummock frost table depth, and then he shows how the hummock in general has an organic layer above a mineral layer. So now when I go to his graphs displaying the numerical data, I can find out what exactly did he mean with what type of data. Schematics can not only be useful in the method section, also the results can be really nicely shown with schematics, or even the main hypotheses. So for example, this figure here shows global change risks for migratory birds. And it defines 3 different types of risks. So first, they can lose range. So in this area, it's not suitable anymore for the bird. So in summer, it can only live in this smaller circle here. Or maybe in winter, the range gets smaller because, for example, here it gets too dry, or other climate gets more extreme. And then the third risk is that then the distance between the summer and the winter habitat might increase. So of course this figure is, you could also explain it quite easily in text, but people just like looking at figures more. So it might be good to show even such a simple hypothesis or result in a figure, just because the reader might be attracted to it and understand it more easily. And this is another figure from a colleague from the Netherlands, and she looked at what happens if I cut away shrubs on a shrub patch in the Arctic tundra. And basically what happened when these shrubs were removed is that the surface sank and there was some water ponding here, and the vegetation completely changed from shrubs to sedges. So this is what happened in a very short picture, but very clear also. And then this is a concept of what she found based on this reduced shrub cover. There was thawing, which led to soil subsidence, trapping of snow and water, which led to more thawing, more subsidence. So it's a positive feedback loop, and methane is emitted in this feedback loop. So this is a very nice way of showing your main result, because it's so intuitive to understand it, and it's just nice to look at a figure and in comparison to just read it as a text. So this slide is an example of how not to do your schematics, because I think both of these schematics have too much text. People won't want to read it. So it might be very important to show all this, but I think probably it would have been better to reduce the content of these schematics and show only things that are really important. Or maybe if it's really all important, then try to, especially in this schematic, try to highlight it in a better way so it's easier to understand. For example, what does belong to other, like make groups, what belongs together in a different color or something, just structure it a bit more. So this was the second video on data reproductions and schematics, and the next video will be on maps and on numerical graphs. Thank you for watching.